how did you figure out maybe how this wasn't just a guidebook, this was far more important? It almost opened a door. It made this feasible, and doable for a lot of people. And as you said, it wasn't only The Lonely Planet, but this was the one that was meant for us. This was not for our parents. This was not for people who had money to travel. This was for us.
Yeah,
It
was, and I'm just, as you were saying that, I was thinking that line about football, and then someone says it's not a matter of life or death. And they said, no, it's much more important than that.
In the 1950s and 60s, the world opened up because of air travel and a new global economy. For the next generation, well, it opened because of The Lonely Planet. What we cover on this channel, the food and culture of places like China, India, and Southeast Asia, well, this idea of exploration, of seeing the world on a backpacker's budget, in the days before the internet, it was, more than anything else, this guidebook that made it possible. For better or worse, The Lonely Planet changed everything. So today we're doing something special. Instead of simply telling the story, we're joined by two of the pioneers of modern travel, Tony Wheeler, the founder of The Lonely Planet, and Joe Cummings, the man behind the first guides for Thailand, Laos, and much of Southeast Asia. It's the story of The Lonely Planet from the people who actually lived it, the voices behind the advice that's guided so many of us, and the good and bad of a legacy that, for travelers, created so much of the modern world. To talk about The Lonely Planet, today you have to begin with numbers. 900 guidebooks, many with multiple editions, translated into 33 languages. More than 150 million total copies sold. That's more than The Hobbit or the first Harry Potter. And a 9-figure sum that would represent the highest price ever paid for a publishing label. But before all that, there was a couple in London setting off on a honeymoon adventure from Europe to Australia. Now, back then in the early 70s, world travel wasn't new. In fact, since the days of Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta, anyone with means and a sense of adventure had set out to explore. But the key word was means. Air travel was still the domain of the rich, still treated like an ocean liner or a high-class train. Tour groups brought the well-heeled to experience the Colosseum and the pyramids, and the guides that existed, even good ones like Fodor's and Frommer's, viewed the world pretty much as two places, Europe and America. But Tony and Maureen Wheeler didn't care about traveling Europe, and they weren't rich either. They set off on July 4th, 1972 with a total savings of 400 British pounds, or actually a bit less, as 65 pounds went into buying an old minivan which would get them as far as Iran, where they ran out of money and sold the van to keep going. It wasn't an easy trip, but at least they weren't alone. Along the way, they found a community, lost souls and adventurers and anti-war radicals who together formed what was then called the Hippy Trail, a series of waypoints organized mainly by word of mouth, where you could find a hostel or at least a field to pitch a tent. You could find beer and books, and most importantly, advice from fellow travelers. From Afghanistan to India, Burma to Bali, the Hippy Trail would form the foundation of a new kind of travel, one that shunned tour groups and famous landmarks in favor of the experience of living with the locals, eating local food, learning a few words to get by, and immersing oneself in a far-off culture. And for Tony, then 26, and Maureen, 22, well, the road in its own way would become home. Let's start at the beginning because we have a lot of ground to cover. So you studied engineering, is that correct? And did you actually work as an engineer before you went on the first trip? What was your...
Yeah, I mean, the only real 9-to-5 employment of my life basically was as an engineer. I worked for a year and a half as an engineer after I left university. And then I went back to university, and then I, graduated a second time. And really, I've been doing my own thing ever since. So yeah, I was an engineer originally.
What was the attitude for when you say in 1972 we're going to travel across Asia? Did people look at you like you were crazy? I mean, even in 2009, my first time doing it, in America, we're a little bit different because we have no hostile culture. We don't understand that you can travel without spending $100 a night in a hotel. I didn't understand that until I did it. What was the attitude like in England in 1972 towards this idea?
You know, I'll say, you know, the same thing as you, that people said, oh, where the hell are you going? You know, is there a road that leads there? This sort of thing. But, and I think, you know, and I think of this in Thailand in particular, because when we first got to Thailand in the, you know, towards the end of that 1972 Hippy Trail trip, Thailand was still, you know, I think they were getting maybe 100,000 tourists a year, which compared to Burma was a hell of a lot. But compared to 10 million or whatever they get today, you know, 100,000 was nothing at all. But nevertheless, when we went around Bangkok in 72, it seemed like there were a lot of tourists there. You know, it didn't seem like we were on our own at all. Not that it was, you know, so crowded you were having problems, but I think, you know, even if it wasn't an everyday thing to do, it didn't seem that unusual to me either.
But and I guess had Goa begun? There were some places that already had, as you brought up the Hippy Trail. Were there some other places that had that sort of, you know, some infrastructure?
When I went through India in 72, we never actually went down to Goa. You know, like saying, you know, my Hippy Trail trip was an abbreviated one. You know, Goa was a big scene then, and Kashmir was a big scene. Kathmandu, and yet, you know, Kathmandu was nothing compared to what it was becoming years later. What do you do?
I just want to ask real quick while we're on this sort of initial trip topic. How did the conversations with your wife go? Was this a honeymoon, or what was the planning behind this?
Well, we sort of, when the first half hour we met, we'd enjoyed talking about travel, and you know, travel was part of the perspective, and the little bit of travel we'd done together before we set off on that trip had been great. You know, we'd really enjoyed ourselves. So, you know, the idea of setting off across Asia was not a great shock. And it was you know, the Hippy Trail was a thing in that era. You know, lots of people will talk about how I'm amazed how many people I meet, and I'll say something, oh, I went through Afghanistan in 72, and he said, oh, I was there too. Yeah, it seems to me like half the universe was in Afghanistan in 72. It's remarkable.
Logistically, how did you get from place to place? Was that was that always a simple, we go to a bus station and get to the next city, or were there challenges in just the logistics of it?
I mean, there wasn't a phone with all the information on it in those days, and nor were there stacks of guidebooks on the shelves. But there was some information out there, and I always bring up the bit guides, which was this sort of mimeographed. I mean, remember the days of mimeograph machines? God, you know, there's more technology that's disappeared in the rearview mirror. But there was the bit guide, which was a sort of a fun base level sort of guidebook of information, and basically you met other people. You know, that you always found out something was going to happen. It's interesting to look back. The place I always think of that we came, you know, through Asia and through Southeast Asia, Bangkok, Singapore, and where we really hit the information gap was when we got to Indonesia, because we got a boat from Singapore down to Jakarta, and we got into Jakarta and we didn't know anything. You know, we wandered around for ages trying to find a hotel we could afford, and eventually found this miserable hotel and stayed there. And when I came back a couple of years later to Indonesia, knowing much more then, you know, there was already a sort of nascent backpacker center. You know, you went there, what was it called? Jalan Jaksa Street. You know, if we'd known it was there, life would have been much easier. When we got to Bali, life was much easier because Bali did have a scene already and places to stay, and who knows. But the information wasn't so readily available in 72. Now you just reach for your phone and bingo. we got to Australia. We hitched a ride out of Bali on a yacht. So, you know, we arrived by sail, which is a good way to arrive in any country. And we more or less stepped ashore on the beach. And we'd chosen the place we went to because the guy who owned the yacht was sailing there because there was an immigration office. So we could get our passports stamped. We weren't sort of illegal immigrants. But then Maureen and I, we didn't have the money to hang around. We had to get on to Sydney and get jobs because we hadn't had enough money to last for a week. So we needed to be in Sydney working in a week sort of thing. So we set off hitchhiking, and we had the most amazing evening. It was just like one thing after another. And eventually we ended up in this pub someone had taken us to, and somebody in the pub said, I'll drive you out to the main road. So I'm pretty sure somebody I know is going to come down the road on his way back to a town about 200 miles down there because he was working in this town for the day. You know, I'll stop him and get him to give you a ride, which he did do. And this guy said, oh, I was going to stop by the roadside and get some sleep, but I'd like to get home because my baby's only 6 months old and my wife would like me back. So you keep talking and keep me awake. And we kept talking and kept him awake. And we got to his town. And, you know, we had nowhere to go, and it was sort of 2 in the morning. And he said, I got my station wagon's in the garage, and there's a mattress in the back. You can sleep on the mattress. So, you know, we spent our first night in Australia with sleeping in the back of someone's station wagon and on a mattress on the floor. But the other really weird thing about this was, he said, that sack up on the wall, he said, there's a baby Joey, a baby kangaroo in the sack. He said, I was driving back the other day and there was a dead kangaroo by the roadside, roadkill. And he said, and I could see there was a Joey in it, a baby kangaroo. So I rescued it and brought it home. You know, I had to get up at 6 a.m. to feed it. But so we spent our first night in Australia sleeping in the back of someone's station wagon with a baby kangaroo on the wall. I mean, fantastic, great.
The Wheelers arrived in Sydney in 1972 with exactly 27 cents remaining of their initial savings. The idea for writing a guidebook came for purely financial reasons. They couldn't afford plane tickets back to England and needed to do something to raise a bit of money. They weren't the first to write a book of travel advice. As already mentioned, there were Fodors, created by a Hungarian man in 1936. Frommers came about in 1957, targeted at budget travelers, specifically American GIs stationed in Europe. And there were the Bit Guides, a loose, and I mean loose, collection of dubious notes written about the Hippy Trail. But there was a massive hole in the market for real information meant for backpackers, especially ones visiting the farthest corners of the world. Through their travel connections, the Wheelers found someone who knew someone who had a hand-cranked printing press. So they set to work, Maureen typing up their handwritten notes and Tony drawing the maps and graphics by hand. They'd call their pamphlet Across Asia on the Cheap, and since they didn't have a publishing house, they'd invent their own, naming it after the lyrics of a Joe Cocker song. Once I was traveling across the sky, this lovely planet caught my eye. Except Tony misheard the words, and thus was born The Lonely Planet. On the topic of that first trip, then, before we move a little further, were you on the trip when you decided to start making notes and turning this into some kind of a guidebook or advice, or did that come later?
Fortunately, I did keep notes because you know, we didn't decide to do the guidebook until well after the trip had finished. It was only because after we'd finished it, people kept on asking us, where did you go? What did you do? How did you do it? That we sort of saw the market opportunity there. I was saying about Rick Steves doing the Hippy Trail, and he said that before he started out, he said to himself, I'm going to write 1,000 words a day. I wish I'd done that. You know, if I'd just set out with that goal, I'd like to read it today, but I didn't. You know, some days I took 10 words. Sometimes I might have written 500 words, but 500 would have been a max. So no, I didn't sort of set out thinking I'm going to write a guidebook about it. The second book we did, you know, 2 years later, that was definitely, we are going to do a guidebook, and bang, 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 taking all the steps.
So what happened next then after you write your book? Did you send it to publishers? Did you already have a publisher? Did you self-publish?
Self-published it, yeah. And you know, that was, I studied engineering at university, but the most useful thing I did at university was work on the university newspaper. You know, far better than anything I learned in the class. Gary, do you want a chair? There are chairs here. You can just take one and sit comfortably. No, I'm feeling him sort of uncomfortable having to do all the standing up while I'm sitting comfortably here.
I was on the radio one time a million years ago, and somebody asked me, this is when I was, this is 20 years ago, and somebody asked me what the most valuable class I'd taken was, and I said it was ninth grade typing, keyboarding, you know, because the idea, and my teacher was listening to this, and she called in, she was in tears. It was a really nice moment that she'd actually heard me say this. She used to teach typewriting, and then when computers came in, they switched the class. But, you know, just the ability to not spend all day writing something that I can type a little bit faster has made a massive difference.
You are so right on that one. Because, I mean, I went to school in America. All my high school years were in America. And in Detroit, when I would have been... I was a teenager, but I wasn't ninth grade, it might have been seventh grade. They said to us, you people who, I mean, what did they do? They were the women who were doing typing, and the boys were doing shop, or academic stuff. And, you know, I was on the academic stream, so I wasn't doing typing or shop. I mean, I was doing shop at some point. But they said, if you want to learn typing, you can skip your lunch and do a typing class for 45 minutes each lunchtime. And I thought, well, that'd be useful. And damn me, it was useful. You know, I mean, I learned to touch type, and, you know, once you've learned to touch type, you never forget.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Very useful skill.
So was there a moment, you know, you listen to these interviews with bands and, you know, Bruce Springsteen, where were you the first time you heard your song on the radio? Was there a moment for you when you were in a hostel and you saw a copy of The Lonely Planet, or was there kind of that moment where you realized, we'd done something?
There were lots of them. You know, one of them was that, you know, that first book we did, even though it was primitive, it was not very well researched, but you know, when it's the only thing out there, when you've got the best, you've got the best thing on the market. You know, there's nothing else on the market, and people liked it. You know, we could see instantly that the whole idea of a book about how to travel across Asia with not much money. I mean, you were saying exactly that thing, you know, people thought you had to spend $100 a night. No, you did not. You know, having that information was appreciated, and we could sense that people appreciated it immediately. And, you know, by the time we did the second book, we were pretty good at it.
The book that would become known as the first Lonely Planet would sell out, 1,500 copies, all typeset, printed, and stapled by hand. Then another 3,500, then 3,500 more. The Wheelers would put on hold their plans to return home, instead heading back to the road, this time focusing on Southeast Asia with their second book elevating Lonely Planet publishing to widespread fame in the backpacking world. And their timing couldn't have been better. 1975 was the same year the Vietnam War would end. The economies on this side of the world needed a jolt, and investments were made in tourism. And before long, the Hippy Trail would be replaced by the so-called banana pancake circuit, with the Wheelers' new book, Southeast Asia on a Shoestring, so essential that it earned the nickname of the Yellow Bible. The Wheelers were onto something, and immediately there was pressure to expand. Demand for more specifics and detailed tips on these incredible places, and they tried to oblige, writing guides on Burma and Sri Lanka, and most notably India, which led to a surge in sales in 1980 and caused the Wheelers to begin seeking authors to join their team, veteran travelers with writing skills and deep knowledge of a certain country, its language, culture, and secrets. Now, this was a high bar. The Lonely Planet was quickly becoming essential, and its guidebook followed by numbers growing exponentially every single year. From the bit guides, they recruited the legendary Jeff Crowther. And for Southeast Asia, it would be a young Peace Corps volunteer and academic researcher named Joe Cummings. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. So I guess we'll start with the easy stuff, which is who are you? Tell me your background. How did you end up coming to Thailand in the first place? Or Southeast Asia, I guess, in the first place?
Okay. Well, Thailand was always the focus for me even before I came, because in my freshman year at Guilford, the Quaker college I went to the bookstore the first week I was there, alone, new student, no friends yet, just looking for something to read. And I came across this book called Towards the Truth, which were translated lectures from Ajahn Buddhadasa Puttatan in southern Thailand, who's since become almost like a saint. He died in 1993. And at the end of that, after finishing that book, I said, well, I'm going to Thailand when I finish college. It took a little bit longer. I graduated, and then I was stuck in North Carolina for about 3 more years. And then I finally figured the way to get there was the Peace Corps. And because I wanted to meet this man, I wanted to study Buddhism in Thailand. I just had this image of a super peaceful Buddhist kingdom here. And when I arrived, it was about 3 months after the massacre of 200 students at Thammasat. And it was anything but peaceful. There was a lot of tension. It was a dictatorship, of course. And there was a curfew from 76 to 82, so I lived under a curfew in Bangkok the entire time, 1 a.m. curfew. And I fell in love. By the time I left, I was like, man, Thailand's it for me. And so when I got a scholarship to Berkeley to do my master's in Southeast Asian Studies, I was like on my way,
How did you first encounter Lonely Planet?
It was when I was here in the Peace Corps and I was getting ready to leave. And the bookstore I always went to, the best bookstore back in those days was DK in Siam Square. Still there, but it's no longer even close to the best bookstore. It's good. Best bookstore still for textbooks for Thais. A lot of university students get their stuff there, But it was even good for just travel literature and fiction. It was just the place to go. And so I went there to stock up on books before. My next stop was, when I left, I was going to go to India and Nepal. And I thought, I'll try and find guidebooks to India and Nepal. But they didn't have any. But then I saw, and it was the first time I encountered, was these 2 Lonely Planet guys were at the bookstore. Burma, a travel survival kit, they were called, and Sri Lanka, a travel survival kit. Each one about this long, maybe 150 pages. Bought them both. Planning to go there. I said, well, I think I'll go to Sri Lanka and Burma too. Why not? I'll have the time. I got all the time in the world. Now, I got my my what do they call it? Readjustment allowance at the end. Well, it wasn't that much, but for a backpacker, it was enough for like a year of travel maybe. And but I never made it to either Sri Lanka or Burma. I went to just India and Nepal. I got absorbed there, and then I came back to Bangkok. And by that time, I read those 2 guidebooks cover to cover, and just realized that this was a new paradigm for independent people traveling, not just people with money would hire a car and driver to go see something, staying in expensive hotels, but just people to just really get under the skin of the culture. That's the way I felt about it, and that was the orientation at the beginning. Nowadays it's different. They're trying to appeal to everyone, and probably mostly middle of the road. So that's when I wrote to Tony Wheeler while I was doing grad school at Berkeley. I said, I love your series. Have you ever thought about doing a guide to Thailand? I was living there, and I know it very well. And tourism there is double, the statistic double that of Sri Lanka and Burma together. And Tony Wheeler wrote back immediately, like a week later. I got an aerogram from him saying, yeah, we're planning one right now, and I can't write it. We're getting too busy. We need more people to write. So, yeah, write a sample chapter. You choose the place. Find something that's not written about in our Thailand chapter in Southeast Asia on a shoestring, so I could see your research skills. And so I did that. I chose Khao Si Chang, that little island off Sriracha?
Sure, of course.
Which was a fucking paradise back then, before Maktaput Harbor, kind of polluted the whole area. And because I used to go there on weekends, I'd sleep for free in the old Brahma IV Palace there on the beach, go snorkeling, and I just had grand time there. So I did like a chapter or a section on Khao Si Chang, and he wrote back and said, that works. I'll send you $9,000, give me the details. And I was off.
So then what happened next? What was the process of writing that first one?
Well, I was so glad to be back in Thailand because I was gone for 2 years.
So you were in the U.S. when you wrote the letter so you were not in Thailand at the time. This was your way to come back.
Yes.
Okay.
It really was that. So the Peace Corps was the way to get there in the first place, and then the way to get back was Lonely Planet and the field studies. I didn't get that much for the field studies, but it was it was probably enough to get there and back and live for 6 weeks or something. With the $9,000, I had a lot more time, and so I just started traveling around Thailand mostly by ordinary orange bus between towns. They didn't have air-conditioned buses in it. They didn't have them. They didn't have air-conditioned taxis, no meter taxis. Very few hotels were air-conditioned except the ultra-luxury ones. So I was, and a lot of small towns didn't have hotels at all. So in those cases, I would stay in, I'd find a monastery, a temple, and I'd ask the abbot. So when then I hit the road with my yam, I just had a shoulder bag with my camera, notebook, and a few items of clothing, and I was having a ball, and I was writing about places never been written about in any tourist article or tourist guidebook ever before. And that was, of course, those were the fun years, the trailblazing. And then later, say 10, 15 years down the line, going back to update, it's still fun. I still enjoyed traveling, but it wasn't, the same excitement wasn't there because I wasn't discovering much new.
If the 1970s were the decade that saw the emergence of Lonely Planet-style backpacking culture, in the 1980s it would begin to go mainstream, and Southeast Asia would firmly replace the old Hippy Trail as the favored destination. The world was now a very different place. Old favorites were now close to the West, with Iran shutting down after the fall of the Shah in 1979, and the Soviets invading Afghanistan just a few months later. But the end of the Vietnam War, the fall of the Khmer Rouge and the Pathet Lao, all of it began to open the doors to mainland Southeast Asia. And in Thailand, there was already an established infrastructure thanks to the years of R&R taken by American GIs. Public perception towards travel began to change as well. In the 60s and 70s, backpacking was frowned upon by the old guard, sneered at as a hippie pursuit like draft dodging or following the Grateful Dead, except with the added reputation of danger. Southeast Asia mainly in the news for hard drugs, violent crime, and even serial killers. But by the 1980s, the post-war economy news story started to talk instead about the beaches, the old temples, and magic mystery of the region. As more and more began to look to the east, Joe Cummings published the first Lonely Planet Thailand in 1982, a guide that would fly off the shelves and play a large part in shaping the new economy. As just one example, backpackers to Bangkok had in the past stayed in the old U.S. Army hotels in places like Nana and Pratunam, until Cummings wrote of a convenient alley near the best sightseeing, where there were a couple Chinese-owned hotels where you could stay for cheap. And thus was born Khao San Road. While Cummings and the rest of the new team began opening the doors to the countries of Southeast Asia, back home more and more young people turned their focus abroad, lost in a decade of Reagan, Thatcher, and the Cold War. It was the perfect storm, and an incredible time to be at the forefront. So that first edition, I think, was published in '82, Lonely Planet for Thailand. Was every word written by you? Did you have stringers who were working with you?
No, not yet. I did later. And even then I always did all the writing. I wouldn't let anybody write anything. But I had people that helped me with research, and then first without any kind of credit because they were just people I had hired temporarily. But that was like, for the first 10 years I did everything solo. First 5 editions, totally solo. And then from the 10th edition on, I started using other people, and then eventually we actually became a team that was mandated by Lonely Planet, in fact. And that also made it less fun for me because I didn't have as much control over the research and the prose. They were, in the beginning I could choose my co-authors. For several issues it was just me and one other author named Stephen Martin, who was excellent. He was a great writer, great research, fluent in Thai. He's since passed away. But, and then I got assigned like people who had never even been to Thailand before, much less not able to speak Thai. And it was frustrating.
So you wrote for Thailand and also for Laos, is that correct? Was it those two countries, or did you have?
I was also, I did Myanmar. I mean, Tony wrote the first edition, maybe the second edition too. And then I updated all the editions from 86 to 98. And then I got blacklisted. Otherwise I would have kept doing Myanmar forever. Myanmar. Yeah. So I wasn't able to go back, and someone else took it over. But I got unblacklisted in 2011, so I've been back since then. But so it was Myanmar, Laos, and Thailand. And Laos I did from scratch, of course. And I did a few more books, but they were like spin-offs. I did Bangkok City Guide, Guide to the North, Thailand's Islands and Beaches. All of those I wrote entirely myself, every word. And I was earning royalties by that time, because that's another thing that changed between the second and third editions. I went from a fee, $9,000 per edition, to royalties, which was 4% edition, like about $1 a guide. And it wasn't long before 2 million copies of Thailand had sold. So financially, I was doing really well. Probably for about 16 years of the 25, I was making serious money.
The impact of The Lonely Planet, and if you ever want to take a break to eat for a few minutes, please go ahead.
No worries.
So the impact, I guess, really became visible when the tourism was all of a sudden not, as you already brought up, not just for the rich. It wasn't something for tour groups. It was something that, I know there are European countries, Australia as well, that people take a gap year, and you see in that year between high school and university to get the chance to do a year of travel. When did you really start to see the change? When did you start to see kind of backpacking become capital B?
Late 80s, I would say, 88, 89. It was just suddenly hordes of backpackers everywhere. I mean, obviously even more now, but they were like the only people traveling back then. I would call them the vanguard. These were the vanguard of mass tourism that is now. Now we have mass tourism, obviously. But the vanguard were these backpackers by the late 80s. They were everywhere. And there was so much interesting. The subculture was still at that time, every time you met a traveler, almost every time, on the road, especially in a place where there weren't a lot, but there were a sprinkling of them, you'd stop and greet each other, and where you been? Where you going? I just came from, oh, you have some tips on that? People exchanged a lot of word of mouth, and you had this genuine sort of socializing that wasn't based on like just going to a party or something or a club. You know what I mean? And now it's just too many people that even think about doing that. Plus you have the internet and all of that. So most of you are interacting with your social media. I suppose that would be your socializing video. So that was really cool. I really liked that. Yeah, I miss that. And that also changed the nature of, and then when that was no longer the case, and it was followed by more mass tourism, then travel became less adventurous overall. I mean, it's a cliche to say that, but it's really true, in my opinion. Like people became less adventurous. I think it's also because things just got discovered, and there's really not many new discoveries to make. So it's like, there's no need to be adventurous. You can see everything, and you can find everything, on Instagram, or TripAdvisor, or whatever, and then, I feel like people are less adventurous. Young travelers are less adventurous now.
The 1980s were not just a decade that saw Southeast Asia's tourism expand. It was also the decade that saw a place long known for ancient culture truly begin to change. Populations decimated by years of wars and dictatorships saw foreign visitors as a chance to earn a living, to bring in much-needed revenue, and a new economy would begin to take shape, one that wasn't always welcomed by that first generation of arrivals. All of a sudden, what had been secret spots and hidden gems were now emerging into little Disneylands, the kind of places we all know today like Bali and Phuket, Old Town Hanoi, and even the village around Angkor Wat. And when so many of the travelers heading to these specific places, and beyond that, to the same hotels and restaurants, were carrying around the same well-worn travel guide, well, there would be a pushback to the influence of The Lonely Planet. What's your take on this and how things would inevitably change hotels, restaurants, towns after?
God, I've actually got two takes. One take is that we picked up on that fairly quickly, that when we did start to have real influence, and I think Vietnam was a place where we that really did hit, because, you know, tourism just boomed in Vietnam. You know, there was no tourists at all because of the Vietnam War. And then suddenly there were a lot of tourists. And, you know, we had a big influence in Vietnam. And we realized that, you know, we had to use that influence carefully. That we learned not to say, when you come to this place, this restaurant is fantastic, you must eat there, because you killed it. You know, everybody went to that one restaurant, and the other half a dozen places down the street, there may not have been 100, there were still 99 or 95, but, you know, they didn't get the business. So we learned not to be too enthusiastic, to measure that enthusiasm when it does have that sort of influence. But the other thing, and this is the opposite situation, is Joe Cummings, who was Lonely Planet's man in Thailand for a long time. And I've been in touch with Joe just in the last week or two.
He's flying back to Thailand from Copenhagen today, I think.
Is he? Oh, you know where he is.
Yeah, we've been in touch.
Yeah, well, great guy. And, you know, had said, you know, that there were elements of Thailand that he really tried to sort of push and promote, and he just couldn't sell them. You know, everybody wanted to go to they wanted to go to Bangkok, first of all, of course, and Chiang Mai and Phuket. And he was sort of trying to sell the Northeast, but he couldn't push people up there. And, you know, and the same with food. You know, he said places that he thought the Thai food was fantastic, but if the tourists couldn't read the menu, didn't go there.
But it just, you know, again, the dichotomy of, well, okay, the place changes. Maybe it's not as, quote, authentic, but it benefits the family, right? It benefits the owners. It benefits the local community. It's hard to say that something, you know, growing is a bad thing. I mean, I'm sure you have to feel some sense of pride in how many people have been benefited by visitors.
Yeah. I mean, I've got, you know, people who say worship the ground of Lonely Planet, you know, but they are grateful. You know, it made a difference to them, and very often they deserved it. You know, I look at places we were enthusiastic about it, and you know, I love that element of it. I think in Bali there was early on, really one of the first restaurants in Kuta Beach that sort of took off was called Poppy's, and Poppy's is still there today.
Still there. I know exactly the place you're talking about.
Yeah, it's called Poppy's Gang Alleyway, and the little hotel Poppy's is still. They've managed to preserve it. You know, they've managed to keep this little enclave of high quality. The garden's beautiful. It's got a nice little swimming pool. You know, it was really expensive from my perspective, and now I think it's really cheap. But you know, and they're very happy that they've had that sort of backpacker thing, and it's worked for them, and I'm very happy for them that it has.
How do you feel about the moral, you know, on one hand, we all want to find this place that's undiscovered and feel like we're somewhere that hasn't changed, you know, and we'll talk about how this relates to Lonely Planet in a moment, but just in general, we want to find something that is very much as it used to be. But the people who might live there want a better life. They want air conditioning. They want better infrastructure. They want the revenue that comes from, you know, what their neighbors might be able to get somewhere else. I don't even know what the question would be, but how would you address that?
Well, you know, I've faced that issue for my entire career, and especially when I was doing Lonely Planet, because people started to talk about, you know, maybe you shouldn't write about a place that's nice. And I seriously considered that question. There have been a few places I decided not to write about because I felt like they were too fragile. I felt like either the ecosystem was too fragile, couldn't handle much tourism, or culturally, or, you know, usually a small town or village or something. But very seldom have I done that. Mostly my reasoning will be this place could really use tourism because it's kind of like, you know, they could use more income. People are struggling a bit, and why not bring in tourism? And I've been involved. I've gone back to places that I've written about, and they have maybe they're misplacing the credit in my opinion, but they'll say, "Oh man, now we have lots of tourists because you wrote about it," And I really can't take credit for that because I think there are other factors. I think word of mouth is more powerful. But I love to see them, I love to hear them, see how happy they are, that they now, I turned my mother's house into a guest house and now I'm doing well. I have in Grabie, there's a guy I just met at a bar, young, he's like 18 or 19, Max, his name was. He was unemployed. He had a university education, very intelligent. He just couldn't find, he was from there. And mother worked for the court, the local court. He was unemployed and couldn't find a job. And he loved music. I think that's how we kind of bonded over listening to some cassettes in a cool local bar. And I said, and he took me to his mother's house for dinner one night. It was just a funky old wooden house. I said, why don't you turn this into a guest house? Then I left. I didn't know if he'd follow my advice. He turned it into Mad Max guest house, overnight sensation, packed all the time, made so much money that he was able to build an apartment building next door. They kept the house, thank God. And they're all renting that. They're renting that out to long-term people, mostly Thais. And they made enough money to send his younger brother to law school, who's now a very successful lawyer. Stories like this make me feel like, okay, it's actually a boon.
Well, let's not get completely lost when we're talking about food, because I have to bring up something related to this. The Lonely Planet effect is something that I think I have such a hard time really wrapping my head around. What is it? I was in the restaurant business. I would open 16 restaurants in China. Wow. If you had told me that somebody with a book that's going to have millions of readers is going to write about my place, I would be the happiest guy in the world. I want my business to succeed. I have to pay my staff. I have to survive, and it's an amazing boon to me. I also understand how, grandma cooking the same dish for the last 60 years on the street, serving just, slowly a couple of customers an hour. Right. I discover this place. I fall in love with it. Lonely Planet writes about it. Next thing you know, she now has a new Cadillac of street carts. Prices have gone up. There's a big line down the street. Right. Her next 3 generations are all taken care of now. Her life is a lot better. My favorite noodle shop is completely different. Right. Did you ever decide, was that something that would enter your mind when you'd write about a place, that this can handle a bigger kind of crowd or
like I said earlier, if I felt like it was fragile in some way, I would leave it out. But that didn't happen very many times, maybe a dozen times in my entire career. So I would do that sometimes, but just to look at the big picture again, to stand back from that, I don't think what I wrote about restaurants made much difference. I think what people will make the correlation, they'll say, oh, I went to this restaurant and it was full of people. They see the Lonely Planet guide sitting on the table and they make the assumption that they came there because of Lonely Planet. I found my restaurant recommendations were hardly followed at all from what I would go back to my favorite restaurants year after year, edition after edition, and see no foreigners there, mainly because the restaurants I most recommended didn't have English menus. I think what foreigners are looking for is an English menu in the neighborhood of where they're staying, and then they just flock to them. Most of the restaurants I recommended just didn't really improve that much. I mean, business didn't go up that much in my entire career. Same with guest houses even. I don't know where the influence, if there was any influence, it was, I think people loved Lonely Planet because of the maps, because they didn't have Google Maps yet. So the maps became very valuable because in the beginning our maps were very primitive, but by the time Lonely Planet matured, they had I remember at one point, the Thailand guide had 125 maps in. I don't know how many now. I don't know if it's gone up or gone down. And they were done by professional cartographers. We had an Israeli cartographer that was amazing. And but I did all the research and all the POIs and everything I would enter on previous maps. And that's what I think people bought them for. Because I would see people using the maps, but they're not actually following any of my recommendations. So I kind of felt like that's what was going on. The other thing I would say is that when people try to credit me for a boom in tourism in Thailand, I say absolutely not. And this I know from talking to booksellers in America. People decide the country they're going to, and then they go look for a guide. They don't go to a bookstore and look at 5 different countries. Oh man, I want to go to Thailand because of Joe Cummings' book. No, Thailand was already in their mind. They already decided to go, and then they buy it. Then they don't use it. Then it's a fashion accessory. They use it a little bit. They use the maps. A few recommendations. I like to think they read the history and the culture sections. Probably not at all. actually, but I like to believe they might when they're on a long train ride. But I don't think, I think the influence is exaggerated.
I'd
love to take credit for it, but I don't think I can.
I can only speak from my own personal experience. For me, it was more, you talk to people, you find out where you're going, who has a Lonely Planet. We were talking about this earlier. But then, okay, we're going to go to this town. Let's check and see, first of all, how do we not get ripped off at the bus station? When we arrive at the bus station,
yes,
what should we be paying and where are we going?
That's valuable info.
And then I'm not looking for necessarily the name of a hostel where I'm going to stay, but I do want to know the street. There's always a street.
Yeah.
There's always a street where I can walk around and find a place. And that's how I would find it. Is you look in the Lonely Planet and you say, well, I see 4 or 5 places on the same street.
I'll go to this one. Yeah.
I'm going to go there and I'm going to walk around and figure it out. And then, the history stuff,
same thing, yeah.
Those long articles, that was really useful in places that you'd never heard of before.
Right.
That was, for example, you want to go to Chiang Mai or Phuket or Bangkok. I'm probably not reading all the stories in there because that's, you'll figure it out when you arrive.
Yeah.
But somebody says you need to go check out, I don't know, Nakhon Si Thammarat. Well, now I understand the context of where I'm going. That was where it was really valuable, at least for me. It was incredibly impactful. It made travel feasible for a long time.
And it was still word of mouth, all the way through. You'd be sitting around and you might make a decision on what the next town to go to, or even what hostel to stay in, because you meet someone and talk to them at a train station or something like that. And then the Lonely Planet is sort of a context for it, the guide. It's like, it's not followed that slavishly, I don't think. People always assumed it, though, just because it was so ubiquitous. It was everywhere. Everyone had one. But I don't think they use it that. They used it, like you say, to find a general neighborhood where the hostels are. Or maybe they pick one for the night, and then they don't like it, and they go up and down the street and find a better one.
Throughout the 1990s, international tourism would continue to grow exponentially, with travel shows and movies set abroad and the emergence of new cultural icons sparking an even bigger interest in exploring the world. By the end of the decade, the title had sold around 30 million copies and was now publishing books for destinations almost everywhere. Joe Cummings would continue occasional work for The Lonely Planet, including in 2000 writing what was at the time the most influential foreign book ever written on Thai food. But he'd also shift his focus to more personal pursuits, playing music and acting in Thai movies, and most proudly, writing a series of academic texts on subjects such as Thai traditional tattoos, the history of Buddhist architecture, and modern viewpoints on the Lan Na Kingdom. As for Tony and Maureen Wheeler, 35 years after landing in Sydney with 27 cents to their names, in 2007, they would sell their stake in The Lonely Planet to the BBC in the largest transaction in publishing history. Today, Joe Cummings is 71, still living in Thailand. Tony Wheeler is 77, married to Maureen for 52 years and splitting his time between London and Melbourne. But even now, after all this time, the one thing that hasn't changed is none of them have ever stopped backpacking. What advice would you have, again, as somebody who is one of the, I would say, most influential people in modern history of travel? Somebody wants to go and explore. You're watching this video from your home, wherever that is, and you dream of one day coming to see the world.
Yeah.
What would be your advice that, you talk to your son?
So you're talking about irrespective of destination, wherever it is.
Irrespective of that. How do you travel? What's the right way to travel?
I would say that this is what I do. And it's like, of course, you look at all the normal sources of information you can find on the internet, or you even get a Lonely Planet PDF or whatever. But the thing I find, because I always find that I'm not getting quite what I want from any of those. The crowd-sourced info on the internet is not reliable. You learn to be discerning, and you kind of feel the authenticness of some reviews, still though you're misled sometimes. And Lonely Planet's always out of date, or any other guidebook. So if it just came out, it's at least 6 months out of date. And if it's, it might be 2 years out of date. Also, it might not, as I was saying earlier, the people who wrote it might not really be area experts. They're just professional travel writers, guidebook writers. They parachute into any destination around. So they're lacking for that reason. So I look for a local blogger. And I find so much information that way. And a place like Thailand, for example, has so many people blogging now, and are people doing YouTube blogs like yourself. You can just watch for hours and take notes and then you get to do some cool stuff, I think. That's what I do. I look for a local blogger. I'm doing that right now for Pakistan. I can't find one. I can't find a good local blogger in Pakistan. Such a dearth of information on Pakistan. I don't know what I'm just gonna have to go and wing it like the old days.
I think I have one or two that I trust. I'll send them to
All
you.
right, great, thank you.
So the second part of that question then would be of the, you know, your entire sort of history of seeing the world. Are there places that you're frustrated that more tourists don't go to? That you know, you're sitting here and looking at, why is this not as popular as a Chiang Mai or as popular as a Bali, or maybe not quite at that ridiculous level, but like where should people consider visiting that right now is probably off the radar?
I would say I feel more grateful than frustrated. When I find that my feeling is more grateful, one of gratitude than frustration. I go, oh, good. Some places are still kind of cool, and I can still go there and feel, you know, like I'm discovering it for myself to some degree. And if you're talking worldwide, I'm not really that super well traveled. I mean, Georgia might be one. Georgia.
Daria just came back from there last week.
I didn't see many tourists when I was there, and I loved it. It was fantastic.
Republic of
Georgia, Thailand,
not Atlanta, I assume. Republic of Georgia, just to be clear.
Yeah. Georgia. Yeah,
not
of course, not the state.
Yeah.
And but in Thailand, I can be more specific because I know every corner of Thailand. Nan, we were talking about before, still relatively undiscovered. A province even more undiscovered that I think is amazing is Patalung in the south, because it's landlocked. It's not exactly landlocked because the Thale Noi, which is part of the Thale Sap, that eventually feeds into the Gulf, edges in there. It's a big part of the province, in fact. And it's just so interesting. I mean, it's beautiful. It's the biggest rice growing province. Got that beautiful, you know, emerald green landscapes during the rice growing season. And that whole inland sea thing is just amazing. These little villages, and the wildlife there, the water birds and the seafood also. You get seafood there that you'll never find in Bangkok. Species of fish that are so incredibly tasty that just don't make it to Bangkok because they're, I don't know, not favored or whatever. Same with Prachuap Khiri Khan, south of Hua Hin. That's also relatively undiscovered. And then there are lots of islands off the coast of Drang. Drang province in general, very undiscovered. Got mountains in the middle that no one ever goes to. And then beaches that people only visit maybe 3 out of the dozens of beaches there. And then islands, 44 islands off the coast. Several of them inhabited and with daily ferries. You see hardly any. You just see backpackers there. And not even that many backpackers.
It's fun to listen to you talk about Thailand because you can feel how much you still have an affinity for this country. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Of course, man. Yeah. Like I was saying earlier, like my curiosity for Thailand, everything Thai just is endless. For some reason, I just want to know more and more.
I'd be curious from the guy who is, you know, along with your wife, the founder of The Lonely Planet, what would be your advice to travelers? Is there one thing that, you know, you have the grandchild sitting on the knee and you say, son, you know, this is the one thing you need to have a good experience traveling. What would that be?
Do you know, there's a paragraph I've got written by a Spanish woman, and she wrote it in Spanish first of all, and it was translated. And it was about, she went to university for some reason in Iran, and it was about traveling around Iran when she was in her late teens, early 20s sort of thing. And she had a fantastic time. She really enjoyed herself. She met great people. And the paragraph in this book, which I only speak a little bit of Spanish, but I like it so much that I can sort of almost memorize it in Spanish as well, even though I read it first of all in English. But it just captured that thing about being young and traveling, how, you know, it's new experiences. And she, in a paragraph, sort of summed up why it was really good to do this stuff when you're young, and, you know, and it's new to you, and why it was almost good not to have any money. And, you know, you were saying about this sort of, you meet someone and you get pointed in this direction or that direction. And she was saying how if you don't have money, you just sort of have to live on your wits a bit more. And people, you know, you meet the kindness of strangers and lots of good things happen to you. And, you know, I'm a great believer in that. I've met so many people who have had those fantastic experiences.
How did you figure out maybe how this wasn't just a guidebook, this was far more important? It almost opened a door. It made this feasible, you know, and doable for a lot of people. You know, and as you said, it wasn't only The Lonely Planet, but this was the one that was meant for us. This was not for our parents. This was not for people who had money to travel. This was for us.
Yeah,
you know.
It was, you know, and I'm just, as you were saying that, I was thinking that line about football, you know, and then someone says it's not a matter of life or death. And they said, no, it's much more important than that.
American football, the real one, the one we play with our hands, yeah?
Yeah. No, look, you know, I mean, we did realize that it meant a lot to people. And I can think of all sorts of lines on this. And I've seen on, when they used to put, you know, ads in papers or whatever, I forget the paper in San Francisco that was sort of meeting people, and people would say, I'm a Lonely Planet sort of person. You know, there's that great line, you know, sexually I'm like Switzerland, which, you know, gives you an image of Switzerland and sex, perhaps. But yeah, I mean, people did relate to it, and you know, a lot of people had, and I think also, you know, we there's a little Lonely Planet authors group that meets in London once a year, and I host them at the local pub, and we usually get about 10 really old hand writers, and they sit around and shoot tall stories, and generally at some point someone gets up and says, oh, sorry, I've got to leave, I've got a flight to Azerbaijan, you know, and it'll never be to Paris or Madrid, it'll be Azerbaijan or somewhere. And someone did 2 years in a row, someone did get up and head off to Heathrow to fly somewhere like that. And you know, they had a great time writing guidebooks. They loved writing guidebooks, and a lot of people. Lonely Planet had its 50th birthday last year, and there were a number of Lonely Planet parties organized by people who used to work for Lonely Planet, because they've sort of kept together. There's a Lonely Planet ethos, and you know, I talk to them and they say, that was the, you know, I worked for you, you don't even remember me because I was there for 5 years, and it was just after you left, or you were away that 5 years or something, but it was the best job of my life. And I think, well, great, you know, I can approve of that.
So we're in a little bookstore just off of Khao San, just a tiny little neighborhood bookstore for backpackers. I'm just going to count the languages that Lonely Planet here is in. Obviously, we have English, a whole bunch of different countries. This is in French, I guess. We have German. I shouldn't have started this without actually knowing what these languages were. We're planning a trip to Tashkent later this year. Let's pick up the Central Asia Lonely Planet from what year? I should check that this is in English first. It's in English. It's kind of fun to come back to Khao San Road area with a copy of The Lonely Planet and find our way towards lunch. It's a different world down here, but it's so much fun. It brings back a lot of memories. Boris, the first time that I met you, you just got to Shenzhen. You were like, you backpacked your way to China, yeah? Like, give me the camera for a second. You?
Yeah, I've hitchhiked 20 countries, around 20 countries, straight into China.
Guys, I know you said you're going up north.
Yeah.
I don't need this. Do you want a Lonely Planet?
Oh, amazing.
Thai Lonely Planet? Yeah.
So good.
I don't need it. I live here.
Cheers.
Cheers. Pay it forward. Subscribe to the channel for more from OTR. Thank you so much to everyone who supports us on Patreon. It makes videos like this possible. Find links below to our Patreon and social media, and we'll see you next week.